This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and I am joined on today's show by two Galileo Project research affiliates who are both members of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. They have substantial backgrounds in engineering that I won't even try to start listing off the companies they've worked for and the work they've done. They've conducted a 10-month independent study of UAP using a mobile laboratory, and here to discuss all of their work, I'd like to welcome John and Gerry Tedesco. Welcome to the podcast, gents.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
And thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Yes, it's a pleasure being here.
It's been a long time coming. As we know, we've been going back and forward trying to get this one arranged. And we've finally got here on a very hot day for both of us.
Same here.
For those watching on YouTube, your background's substantially nicer and cooler looking than mine. But we're both experiencing kind of heat waves where we are. And apologies to anyone listening. I've got a bit of a hoarse voice, but I'll get through it. I'll survive. But listen, gents, let's get to it. A lot to discuss. And I want to start off with your own backgrounds. And firstly, how early does your interest in the UFO topic go back? And I remember watching an interview you both done a while ago where you talked about potentially a very early Men in Black type visitation.
Yes.
Yeah, it's it goes back to our childhood. We had an interest.
Yeah, probably at this point going back over 30 years. But early childhood. We've had some experiences with some unusual characters. One was a visitor that we had back at, I guess at the time we were about 13 or 14 years old.
Might be even younger than that.
Yeah, and this guy had come into the house, and he was representing a company called Slug-a-Bug, which was
an exterminating
company. But he had nothing that had to do with exterminating. He brought a briefcase in. The books that he had in there were.
He was also dressed in a nice suit, and he had a fedora
hat. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we welcomed him in. He came in and he started to talk about future events and UFOs at the time. And he certainly had our interest. He was quietly left after the meeting that he had with us, and we never saw him again. But it was kind of an unusual meeting. And I remember at the time our parents had checked to see, whether or not, this guy was for real. They contacted the local authorities, and, there was no company that they know of called Slug-a-Bug. And this guy wasn't, anybody that they was recognizable for any of these companies, that were out there. But it's just a very unusual experience, for us.
Yeah, especially an attaché case or full of books on Edgar Cayce and any books on UFOs, and that's what he kind of talked about. And we had an older brother who was about 3 years older than we are, named Pat and Pasquale, and he had an interest in this. So he was talking to all of us, but mainly to him, back and forth, and. That got our interest. That kind of got our interest because my brother Pat had a big interest in UFOs, and something we talked about.
Right, and of course, all the shows at the time, In Search of with Leonard Nimoy and so forth. It was for our generation, I think it was a big deal. To have that kind of interest. I think we were the explorers at the time. Open up to a lot of different new concepts and new ideas. It's. Back then, it's there wasn't a whole lot more you could do. You did a lot of reading, and weren't occupied by small computers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, in that time, it was of course the Apollo space program was happening, so we had interest in the Apollo space program and that kind of exploration. And then there was also the Jacques Cousteau marine research that he was doing, that he had programs on every now and then. Right. So that caught our interest in.
And this is a rich area. Long Island is used to be a high tech capital for a while. We had a lot of big companies here that were involved in the space program, especially Grumman Systems. Grumman had built a lunar module and shipped it down to Florida, but it was right here. It was designed and built right here in Long Island. At a local facility, which is roughly about 10 miles from us right now. But we had all kinds of technology. We have a big, we have a nuclear test plant, laboratory, Brookhaven National Laboratory, which is roughly about 13 miles from us.
It has a nuclear accelerator. Right?
Nuclear,
bigger.
yep. The RIC, which is a large accelerator there, and a lot of
research is
done. An awful lot of research. So it's like I said, growing up with all of this stuff, it's kind of got our interest, and it was something that was very strong, remained strong for a number of years.
As a matter of fact, one of the first schools we attended is Grumman, the Grumman Corporation, who developed the lunar module and the F-14 fighter and F-16 fighter. They had opened up a school called Grumman Data Systems Institute, and that was actually the first school that John and I attended.
Mm-hmm.
And it was engineering and all areas of electronics.
Right. It was at the time it was state of the art. A lot had to do with the aviation technologies and so forth. But it's again, it's this is something for us. It's it's a rich environment for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's also a number of sightings and that sort. This is
Long Island is
it's
completely a hotspot of UFO sightings. It's got a history.
Yeah.
Let me ask then, before we get to that, and it may bleed into it, how do you reflect back on that kind of visitation? Because that could be seen as sinister, someone turning up out the blue. Doesn't seem coincidental that he turned up, and started talking to you a lot. Is it something you've reflected back on that you would speculate why that may have happened? And does it tie in with any of that kind of sighting, visitation stuff?
Yeah, we had talked. I mean, it was 5 brothers. We had talked about it with my older brother at the time, and it was kind of bizarre that it came out of the blue. It's something we had an interest in. He talked about like when he talked to my older brother about he saw him being very intuitive and a direction we might take in life towards technology and that kind of thing. It was interesting. It's a little bizarre. It was quite bizarre.
Yeah, he was mysterious. I will say that. I don't think any of us really remember what he looked like. That's an interesting thing. It's we can't remember his face.
Memory I have is I don't know if anybody saw the trailer to The Exorcist when the priest first goes to the home of the girl he has the hat on, the dark suit.
Yeah.
That's what it reminds me of.
Okay.
Visitor coming to your door.
Just picture that.
And do you know what? You've explained the classic Men in Black type figure look and dress, but that's also another feature, isn't it? That people struggle to remember what they look like.
Yeah.
Quite plain, featureless, and
right. Yeah. That's the thing. Yeah, it's we have no vivid memory of what characteristics, what attributes.
Yeah, I don't remember his face
at the time, other than wearing this this big hat and
dark suit with
a dark suit. It's it was always in the shadows. And I don't think any of us we've talked about it many times. We have no memory of anything physical that we can remember, is any facial features or that sort of thing.
It was very friendly, kind of invited himself right in. We had a neighbor that was an older girl at the time who was staying, was hanging out with us. So everybody was kind of mesmerized by this guy, and he just kind of invited himself in.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Probably not the wisest thing.
No, probably modern times that definitely wouldn't be happening. But you're saying we're going back a few decades, aren't we? And that door-to-door salesman type thing was pretty. I remember I'm 38, and even going back to the early 90s for my earliest memories, I remember you would get folks knocking on the door, selling books, encyclopedias, cleaning products. Mm-hmm. This was all expected, and that sort of things kind of died off, especially in the UK. Door-to-door stuff just doesn't happen as much anymore at all. I'm guessing similar in the US.
Yeah, it was exactly the same in the U.S.
The days.
And that's probably why we allowed him in. I mean, we always had salesmen come at the door, whether it was vacuum salesmen or encyclopedia
sales. Yeah.
So it was almost a natural thing.
And what about sightings then? So you're saying 5 brothers growing up. Is that something you all experienced together whenever you had any sort of sighting, or just the 2 of you? How did those ever work out? What were they like?
At the time we would see things in the sky, we weren't quite sure what they were. I mean, see lights in the sky that would do some odd things. I know my brother Patty talked about it at one time. I can't remember specific details, but they were kind of vague, but they were unusual enough to remember it.
Yeah, I mean, the colored lights, that sort of thing, but nothing. I would say nothing that was that would stay in your memory as far as something significant at the time.
Nothing intrusive. You've never had, again, thinking of folks who have maybe had a closer encounter, would then experience a Men in Black type visitation after. Nothing like that you can remember. It's always been more something in the sky, point of light, colored light, and that was all.
No, the actual bizarre incidences happened after we started our study.
Yeah.
That's when we had something very strange. So a few strange things happened.
Right.
Well, let's fast forward to that then. You've had those incredible engineering backgrounds, folks, and some of that may come up in the conversation if you gents want to go into that. But that background, that location is stuck with you. Kind of interest in technology, advanced technologies, working with all that kind of stuff to the point now where you've put your own money into investigating the UFO topic in a pretty spectacular way. If you're looking at this being independent, boots on the ground study, this isn't a couple of guys going out with a video camera and a notepad and, talking to locals who have seen something. This is a pretty extensive work. So let's get to that then. You're working with Galileo Project, or affiliated with them. You're members of SCU. So what kind of came first in all of this?
Okay, the first thing came with when the release of the ODNI report, I believe it was June 25th of 2021, and Avi Loeb had taken an interest in it, and he was interested more in interstellar objects before that, and he took an interest in UAPs when this report was released. And at the time, we were actually constructing a prototype RV that we wanted to use for doing environmental studies like electrosmog, that kind of thing, studies on wireless communications and that area.
Yeah, and that was something that I think was bigger in the UK than it was over here, as far as the concern over electronic emissions, electrosmog. They used to call electrosmog emissions. Basically, where the areas where they might have had cancer clusters and that sort of thing, and Long Island has had a few of those. So what our intent was to go from one end, from coast to coast and across the island,
and do a survey,
and do an electronic survey of mapping to find out what the hot spots were and that sort of thing. So we had basically retrofitted an RV with the proper equipment, spectrum analyzers, electronic meteor analyzers, and we were looking for specifically, high emission spots, and we would map it, and and we were going to correlate this stuff to, or try to correlate it to, to cancer clusters and that sort of thing that we've had over a number of years, in specific regions, so. That it early on, like I said, we had established the proper equipment, the way to mobilize it, to get it back and forth,
and we wanted to actually do a bottom up design of an RV, a totally new RV that would be enclosed, have a Faraday enclosure within the walls, so it would prevent EMI emissions, so you can actually get clean signals. When we'd go out and do the surveys,
right?
When Avi Loeb had come forward and said he wanted to look at UAPs, and he talked about using telescopes at the time. We thought there might be a more effective way to do that, using a variety of sensor equipment and radars. So we realized it wouldn't take much to upgrade our RV, a mobile laboratory, using install radar and the extra piece of equipment to look at UAPs. So we had done that. It took us about a year to build this, and of course we were completing at the time. Avi Loeb came forward, took an interest in UAPs, and he wanted to form the Galileo Project. So we reached out to Avi Loeb. We got in contact with him. We spoke to one of his principal scientists, and we discussed what we were doing. And of course they were excited about it. So we talked to Avi, and he brought us into the Galileo Project, invited us in.
And just on that, because you're describing things really well, for anyone outside of the US, an RV would be a remote home, mobile caravan, mobile laboratory. Yeah, just for those that maybe are thinking RV. I know what it is, but some folks might be like an RV, but
a recreational vehicle.
Yeah, this vehicle was more like an expeditionary vehicle. It was like a military tank.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
equipment.
It was you know, a lot of the equipment was there. A lot of cameras, and of course, you know, you can't be driving around with cameras going under bridges and that sort of thing. So, you know, some of that stuff had to be shut down. It had to be covered and in some cases removed. You know.
Yeah. So I mean, we used it for when we went out there. We went out to the Barrier Island off of Long Island, southern Long Island, and yeah, of course, we were doing an independent research by Avi. We had collaborated with Avi and his engineering team and helped assisted them in developing their system.
Mm-hmm.
So they took a different direction. We were taking our own direction, a mobile laboratory, with a full platform. So
it was based on a fixed
system. Yeah, we had a mobile system.
Yeah.
So we went out. We were the first to go out and actually start conducting studies. Avi, they were still running a test phase on their system. So we decided on a barrier island off of the southern coast of Long Island, and this is due to a conversation we had with pilot Ryan Graves. He told us about that the most of the Navy pilots were seeing objects. I think it was 2014, or about 10 miles off the coastal the eastern coast of Long Island. Eastern coast of the United States,
right off the Virginia coast,
coast and Jacksonville area.
Mm-hmm.
So he said they were occurring about 10 miles off. Objects seen going out towards the sea. So we figured the coastline was probably an ideal spot, and our assumption was if they were seeing it at Jacksonville and off the coast of Virginia, it probably continued along the entire coast. And Long Island and the Barrier Island of Long Island, which is called Fire Island National Seashore, sits out in that area. So it would be an ideal observation area.
Yeah, it's almost like a peninsula off the U.S. coast.
Yeah, you have to get to it through a long bridge.
It has quite an extent out to sea. You know, it's almost 150 miles from where the city is.
Yeah.
You know, so anything that was making its way up the coast. This was probably we thought was probably an ideal spot to monitor it with radar, active radar, and some of the long distance sensors that we had.
We had a proprietary radar system. It uses two radars, and they're tilted on two different axes. You have an x-axis and a y-axis, and this was to get a better profile of an object that might be, it may have a shape that's inconsistent with what you normally would track with an aircraft.
Right, yeah.
Or size-wise, maybe if it's small, it would give us a better profile. So we had this was actually John's idea, this proprietary system. Yeah. So we had he developed this XY axis radar system, and we had to get an FAA
FCC
approval for it.
Yeah. It had to be licensed as an experimental use.
Yeah.
For I mean, it's not something you don't take. This was marine-based radar systems, X-band radar. So it's to put it on a mobile vehicle, on a land-based vehicle. It's we had to get licensed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But we were able to do that. We got two licensing from the FCC, and we were able to use it right off the coast. And it greatly assisted our detection methods.
And the other thing we wanted to do is we want to have an area where we can control the conditions a little bit. So it'll be more of an ideal study ground. So we had gotten a research permit from the Parks Department for an area on this Fire Island National Seashore called Robert Moses State Park.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have control of it. The human population, the visitors would be limited after 7:00 to people with either an astronomy permit to to look at the sky watchers, or a fisherman to a certain time, maybe 10:00, 11:00 at night, and we would have full use of the air, control of the area
overnight.
Yeah.
So let me say, you've got this incredible vehicle kitted out, and even a layman like myself can understand just the way you're talking about. You've got various different sensor types, and we keep hearing the more sensors you've got aimed at an object, the better the reading, the better the data. We get so frustrated in the UFO topic when we get one data source for a sighting, one piece of footage with nothing else. So it sounds ideal. What about the area before you even get there, or when you first get there? Is there anything particularly different or unique about that East Coast, or why you think objects may be there even in the first place?
Well, the Fire Island is very it's an isolated area. There's very little light pollution. It's so you get a great view. Of course, there's a limited human population there at those times. They're they're in their homes or whatever, or they're on the mainland of Long Island, and we knew where the airports were. We mapped out their flight corridor, and it was the nearest airport was about 38 miles away to our west. So we would focus on that coastline and areas south over the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, the southeastern sky.
Yeah,
which would basically put you, if you were looking at the coordinates and the line of sight, the line of sight would put it over the Virginia area, then Jacksonville, Florida area. So, we wanted a clear line of sight, and we have radars that would scan out almost 60 miles.
Mm-hmm.
So early on, like I said, we weren't we didn't know specifically what we were looking for, other than retrospective data that we've heard. And,
we looked at the retrospective data,
and that was important to us. It was to use that information to try to establish some kind of a baseline for equipment use, and that evolved over time. I mean, early on we went out there, and the sightings that we saw weren't very obvious. At first, I mean, there was some interesting stuff that we saw, some very bright, visible, colored orbs, and they'd be short-lived, and just you would see it 1 minute, and then they would extinguish another, after a few seconds or a few minutes. So what we ended up doing was, over time, was redeveloping our sensor pack and trying to figure out what it is that we need in order to see these objects. And we discovered that a lot of them seem to have a spectral management. They almost go through something called signature management, where they're changing their spectral range.
Yeah, I just want to take one step back. Is that so? The equipment evolved. We had a full hyperspectral camera system. Everything from visible light to infrared, near infrared to shortwave infrared to long-wave infrared.
Yep, and on the other end of the spectrum was UV, UVA, UVB, UVC. So these are the things that we looked at.
And we spent the first 2 months eliminating all the prosaic explanations.
That was important.
We got very familiar with navigation lights on aircraft. Of course, the flight patterns coming into the airport, holding patterns and all that kind of thing. And of course, that area was isolated from the area we were looking at.
I just want to add, that's really good to hear, because in this topic, I've said before, I would love everything to be a UFO. And I mean non-human intelligence, right? I think we all would, but they aren't. Right. And when you say orbs before, that's something I sometimes struggle to get on board with, because I see so many videos that people share of their Ring doorbell cameras, right, and it's dust or a bug flying past, and they claim it to be some non-human sentience. And I'm sorry, I don't see that. So for you to say, you know what, you actually did spend time going, and you guys are far smarter than I am, especially given your backgrounds and what you're actually going and doing, that you're going, look, are we looking at lights? We're trying to eliminate everything from a particular area that could be an aircraft or military craft or a drone, as someone let off. We call them Chinese lanterns, that are got a little fire tea light inside of them. It takes time to eliminate all of that, because you naturally will pick up that sort of data, won't you? Exactly. Especially, I'm guessing, early on.
Right. Yeah, and that's something we wanted to eliminate right offhand. I mean, all the man-made aircraft, from helicopters to planes to various airliners, to biomass, into insects, birds, bats.
Yeah.
And we had multiple pieces of equipment to do that. And of course, they were high resolution. They had high magnification.
Yeah, we spent many hours looking at planes, looking,
to make sure that
coming into the airport, and they remaining in their glide paths and that sort of thing. So, and that can be very tricky if you live near an airport. If these planes are in a holding pattern, they have bright strobes on them, and the strobes can be very easily confused with something that could be a bright star or some kind of anomalous identity, but they will sit in a holding pattern for quite a while, and there was certain things that we had to rule out right away and be able to detect that. Obviously our radar helped quite a bit to give that profile,
and then we used ADSB software,
which we used extensively. The other thing is high zoom thermal cameras with the with optical zoom. I'm not talking digital is gives a lot of distortion when you try to expand it greater than 5 times. So we used optical zoom cameras that were better than 30 times, and we were able to see the silhouettes of the fuselage, the wing structure. So these are things that we could identify even at 28,000 feet.
Yeah, everything has a thermal signature. I mean, it's very hard it's almost impossible to eliminate a thermal signature. There's always variations in temperature, and you have a good FLIR system or a forward-looking infrared system, you'll be able to see that.
Right, and then same could be said for ships out on the water. Being that we're looking off the coast.
Ships, yeah.
There's large ships out there, and we'll do a radar scan just to make sure that we're hitting a boat or ship of some kind. And again, we use the same process using these high zoom thermal cameras to see the silhouettes of the lower sections of the boats, because the lights can be on a superstructure, and they can appear high up off the ocean surface.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Everything has navigation lights, whether it's a ship or it's an aircraft. And so we became very familiar with the navigation light systems. So these became relatively easy to eliminate. And then what the interesting thing is, after probably about third month, is then we started noticing what John talked about, the orbs, these orb-like objects that would. And they would behave. They would have bizarre flight behaviors. They would appear and suddenly disappear. They would take on a variety of colors, from blue to orange to red to green. Some of them would look like a sparkling Christmas ornaments, and they would change the luminosities.
They're like a starburst pattern. You'd see something where they're described by some viewers as flames or.
Yeah, fireballs.
Fireballs.
And it's you see it along the entire eastern coast. People would talk about these fireballs. Yeah, orange fireballs. Yeah.
So
let me just check on that then. So when it comes to those kind of orb sightings, are you seeing those on multiple systems? Is this with the naked eye? Is it something that's only appearing on one type of sensor? Just talk me through that makes you think, or you can tell me, who can be skeptical of kind of orb stuff, here's why this is actually interesting.
So here's the interesting thing is they won't necessarily be on every system. They'll this is where we believe there's some kind of signature management with these objects. Occasionally they would be visible or to be very vague. Most of the time we wouldn't see them visibly with the eyes or with a typical camera.
Eyeballs,
Yeah, we would have to. Most of the time they would be in the infrared. It would be near infrared or shortwave infrared. And the interesting thing is there were times that if you saw them in the near infrared or the visible, they would suddenly look like they'd disappear. But we'd find it in another piece of equipment that would show up in the shortwave infrared.
Yes.
So we believe it's changing. They're changing their spectral range.
Yeah. So by having multiple pieces of equipment, with each one with its own unique signature or own unique frequency range, we could determine whether or not the object remained in the visible light or it basically frequency hopped, over to near infrared or shortwave infrared. We'd be able to see it in some of the other hyperspectral cameras. So what we ended up doing was grouping these cameras together.
Yeah, it was layered. We
look
looked for correlates.
Yeah. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to see the same object in multiple views and multiple systems, not the same system.
And we used the radar as a detection method. And most of the time, these objects they would appear intermittently on radar. They would pop in and pop out, almost like you would see them on the camera system,
like fireflies.
Yeah,
they would. From that data, then you're collecting and the patterns you're seeing, is it enough for you to believe they're changing those signatures based on being observed?
We think so. We think it's deliberate. It's some kind of intelligence.
Right. I mean, this is not something we see with when we weren't just recording these objects. We were recording the normal flight patterns and so forth of aircraft, man-made aircraft, helicopters, small planes, large planes, jets, and those particular objects had their own unique signatures. As far as the wavelength of light, you'd see the visible light. You'd see, of course, the navigation lights, which had a period to it. It had its own frequency of a flash rate. So these were easier to identify. And as far as the infrared, some of these lights, these strobes and these aircraft are using do appear a little bit in the near infrared. They do give off some infrared energy, but not to the depth of what we would see with these what we call spheroids, which is basically these lights that
they would appear spherical in shape, very round in shape. The other thing is, an aircraft with our equipment at a 60 times zoom, we could take a pinpoint of light of an aircraft and we could zoom in on it. We could actually see all the navigation lights.
Yeah, easy to
These
see.
objects we would zoom in on, and they would stay a sphere. There was no navigation lights whatsoever.
Why do you think they're? And I'm assuming they're always at a distance, so they're not coming up close at this point. You're observing these out over the water, yeah.
Yeah, so that was the interesting thing. So there seemed to be an awareness that we were there, and of course, us using radar, one of the things we were speculating was, could our radar transmissions be bringing these things in, like some kind of electromagnetic migration? So they would appear a lot closer to the shoreline. In fact, we have videos of these meandering at the shoreline, suddenly appearing at the shoreline we were in, suddenly disappearing.
And they would show up as groups, almost like patterns. There'd be group patterns of objects. One of the features on the radar is something called where we can actually remember. The radar will remember the last position.
Echo trails.
Echo trails.
Yeah,
so you can produce these echo trails, and it would show up as a white cloud if these objects appeared multiple times. And we look at these echo trails, and we'd see these unique patterns, all facing towards the source, our antenna, our radome antenna. And
there's one night in particular that happened. Happened often, that you would have this wedge of objects, and the echo trails of these objects all focused towards our RV.
Right, and you'd see multiple coning patterns. If we move the RV to a different location,
it would follow.
What we wanted to do is see if we could, see if they'll follow, see if we could reestablish.
Yeah, we wanted to see if it was a weather phenomenon or something,
and
some kind of atmospheric condition.
Within a short period of time, you'd see this pattern reforming again at a different location.
And these were solid objects that were appearing in this wedge, but they were moving. They appeared to be either blinking out or moving so fast that they would fill in, they would paint this with this echo trailed wedge pattern. So
you observe these over 10 months, the same objects. At what point do you feel you can start to speculate? I think conclusions are hard in this topic in any way, shape, or form, no matter how much data we're collecting. But at what point can you really start to speculate and put a firm look? Here's what these might be, what they might even be doing. Here's where we think there's a distinct pattern or a particular location. At what point do you start to kind of form that kind of thing?
It was within that midpoint that we starting to see the behavior in these patterns. And then the one thing we were confused about what these things might be, because it didn't fit normal air traffic. So we actually tried to look into if it could be drones of some sort. Is it maritime drones, maybe just surveilling the coast, or it could be the DoD be doing something, the Department of Defense, or could it be some kind of some other agency, the law enforcement doing that? So we had checked. We
reached out to.
Yeah, we had a researcher working with us named Donna Lee Nardo. She worked as a private investigator at one time, and she did all our background work. She investigated the drone possibility, and she called the agencies to talk to the authorities, and they would. There was no evidence. They don't fly. The law enforcement doesn't fly anything after a certain period of time, and these was happening overnight.
And this is a protected area anyway.
Yeah, it's a federal piece of land, so you can't fly drones over here. It's illegal.
Yeah, it's too close.
So it's enforced.
Yeah.
And it's actually enforced by the police departments in the Marine Bureau.
Right.
The other thing is the maritime said the border patrol agency said they don't fly anything like that over, and especially not all night long. We reached out to Chris Mellon, and we asked him if he was aware of any DOD surveillance of the coast for some reason, and he wasn't aware of anything. And he said he saw no reason Long Island would be a subject of some kind of surveillance anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we did our due diligence as far as
so we were
reaching out to the Coast Guard and that sort of thing, and to see whether or not
reached out to the Coast Guard.
There was something that we were missing. If there was some reason for them to be flying drones out there.
So nobody could account. None of the agencies could account for it. The other thing is, I forgot where I was going with that.
Yeah, it left a lot of confusion. Because
and the other thing is they weren't acting as drones. I mean, even drones have navigation lights on them.
Yeah,
we have acoustic systems. We'll be able to hear the turbo, the fans running on them, the props. We heard nothing. These were completely silent.
And this could be heard very easily with some of the tech that we have. We have very sensitive microphones with parabolic dishes behind them. So they focus the sound, and we can get pinpoint accuracy as far as where this stuff is coming from, and we can hear it very well. If something that's over the water, if there's somebody out on a boat, or if we target that particular location with these parabolic antennas, we can hear everything coming out of that particular area of the sky or the water and that sort of thing. Like I said, we can pinpoint all of these sounds based upon our equipment. This is something we weren't able to do with these objects. We focus the antennas, and you might have maybe as much as maybe a small murmur, but nothing. It was very hard to differentiate any sound coming from these objects. With even with the equipment that we had, we could certainly use the parabolic dish to look up at a small aircraft or a helicopter or and be able to hear that sound very, very clearly. Yeah. And we have signatures of that. We've actually recorded signatures of those specific sounds.
Yeah, if it's a rotor from a helicopter, that's got a particular sound. If it's a turboprop, that's how the sound of a propeller-driven plane. If it's a jet engine or a turbofan engine, then it's a particular sound.
And everything has a unique signature. If you look at a spectrum analysis of it, we're not just listening to sound. We're not listening, human listening levels. We're listening to sounds that are in the noise floor. They're very, very small sounds, and we can get a unique signature as far as its frequency components, anything that might have some kind of a harmonic to it. These are things that can be easily identified. And we weren't able to get any kind of an identity on these objects,
So with your backgrounds, and like I say, folks, seriously, if you want to touch on some of the engineering backgrounds that you have, it may help folks. But why does something give off so little sound at that distance? Is it because they are there surveilling, they are observing, they don't want to be heard, they don't want to be seen? What's the thinking?
Yeah. That was our thought, that they didn't want to be seen, or they didn't want to be observed. They were trying to stay hidden.
Yeah, and that's something that we can only surmise as far as what it might be. I mean, it's and
they would come in at some times where of course there's nobody out. Is 1 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 2, 3, sometimes 4 in the morning, and it would be random that they would pop out.
Yeah, and
what sort of frequency over the 10 months then were you picking these up? Are we looking at daily? Are we looking weekly?
It was very random. There was some nights we would see virtually nothing. Other nights we would see clusters of them. In fact, in August we actually had a triangular formation of objects that hovered, that suddenly appeared. Again, off the shoreline where our mobile laboratory was parked, and we picked it up. We picked it up on our infrared systems, so you couldn't see it. It suddenly appeared. Suddenly was there. We got there about like it was 11 o'clock at night. It was August 28th.
Yeah, it was after 12. When we actually noticed.
Yeah, we actually noticed after we set up the equipment, and some of our research assistants were still setting up the equipment, and John and I noticed this triangular formation of objects that appeared. I think it was like a quarter after 12.
Completely invisible to the naked eye. Completely invisible to it. These objects were they had luminous energies that were, if you were to compare it, it would be as bright sometimes as the moon.
Yeah.
There was a lot of luminous energy coming from these objects, but they were in the infrared.
Yeah.
There was nothing in the visible light. And the only way we could detect it was on our infrared system that was inside the RV, and of course our portable night vision cameras. And this is something that, there was 4 of us that viewed these things, and none of us could see anything in the visible spectrum.
And they never made a sound. They were completely quiet. What would you say the distance from the coast was?
It was just around 1,100 feet is what we.
Yeah, it was pretty close to the coast. We're hovering maybe.
Yeah,
and they were hovering maybe what? How far is this?
To about 250 feet from the ocean surface.
250 or 300 feet off the ocean surface, and it was they were fixed. They looked like they were rotating, and we saw of course they're changing luminosities, almost like a pulsation. They were in a scalene triangle formation. 2 were offset this way, and then you had 1 on this side. And on the of course the wider end of the triangle was on the left, the
base,
left,
the
left
base
side,
of it,
yeah. The wider base.
And they were 3 distinct objects, not one
We
object.
believe there were 3 distinct objects. I mean, we considered the possibility maybe it was 1 solid object.
Yeah, but we were actually looking through the center to see if it blocked out stars and that sort of thing. That's not something that we were able to observe.
We couldn't. Yeah.
But the pattern was very stable. For 3 objects to stay out there, they were out there for almost 45 minutes. And for them to remain as stable as,
and there was strong winds that night.
And we had wind gusts of up to 35 miles an hour that night.
In any aircraft, even a helicopter, it's going to drift a little bit. You're going to have some movement.
Yeah,
it didn't stay fixed.
It was fixed in that position. That's pretty much where it stayed. And
I know that when we had talked about this, and when we had wrote a paper and we actually published a book on it, some scientists had questioned whether it could have been a mirage or something called a Fata Morgana. That's something we consider right away. We looked. You need a thermal inversion layer in order to create a Fata Morgana mirage, where you reflect whether it was a boat or some other object, you reflect higher up in layers, and you'd see layers of these of a repeating layer of a boat.
Right.
We did something we looked up. We used a thermal imaging system to look for a thermal inverted layer. There was no thermal inversion.
Yeah, yeah. And this is thermal. This is a long wave energy. It's a long wave thermal camera. So if you looked at an inclined angle up at the sky, you would actually see these multiple colors, and especially if you're using certain color palettes for these.
It's called a rainbow palette.
It's called a rainbow palette, and the rainbow palette would actually define these layers, these temperature layers, so you could clearly see that, And if these temperature layers, for whatever reason, had shifted, where you would have the cooler areas below, and the warmer areas below and the cooler areas above.
Yeah.
If
it
you
should gradually cool.
Right.
A thermal inversion is when it's gradually cooling, but all of a sudden you get a warm layer. That's what reflects the.
And that would cause a reflection.
You get anomalous propagation.
And it would do the same with any electromagnetic energy. Light as well as radio waves.
Yeah.
So radar could do the same thing. You'd have basically a reflection, a mirage on the radar, simply because there's a thermal layer, there's a temperature inversion in those layers.
So it's something we look for.
So it's something that it's specifically that we look for. But that night we didn't have any of that, we look at cloud-based data to see what the lower levels of the clouds are. So anything that we can judge its altitude by, and of course, some weather stations, they'll actually give you that information. They'll tell you what the lower cloud base is, what the height is, the altitude is at sea level. So we were always monitoring that, and we have, of course, we have buoy data. that we look at and see what the water temperatures are. Anything that
we use
those kind of
we
problems.
use a maritime apps,
which
we could see shipping traffic at night too. That would give us information.
Yeah, so that would identify a particular ship out there.
There was not,
So again, we're looking at that data. We're also looking at our radar information, and our radar showed nothing. Our long scan radar, the X-band radar. So on doing a horizontal scan, we could see that there were ships out there, and we could monitor these ships out as far as 60 miles. But where the local area where we were, there was nothing reflecting back. We had no reflections on our radar at all. So we're not this is not something that if it were even drones, we'd have something. We'd have something coming back. But this particular sighting at that night, there was nothing that we can detect it with other than our hyperspectral cameras. That's in the near the shortwave infrared.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting, and I'm hearing a lot so far on observation. You're doing a lot of observing, a lot of collecting data, perhaps something observing you, given some of the reaction. I wonder what sort of communication was attempted, either you trying to communicate with these objects or whatever time they tried to communicate with you felt.
Well, this is where it got interesting. I'll let John explain how this stuff.
Yeah, so yes, we did try to get their attention, and they tried to.
Yeah, while the rest of our team was setting up the equipment at the shoreline, they were still involved setting up the equipment. John and I went out with our IR cameras, and we went to the beach line.
Yeah,
so where it was breaking.
So we took a fire torch, a visible light flashlight that would shine a beam, a very bright beam, into somewhere in the vicinity of about 18,000 lumens. So they were very bright lights, small beams. We could focus the beam, and we also used infrared illuminators. Beam illuminators. So the infrared was about 905 nanometers, and we also have, again, the visible light. And we tried to elicit a response by moving the light back and forth across this object.
Occasionally flashing at it.
What we discovered is that we could get the object to reflect the light. So we knew there was something out there. It was reflecting light. It was giving us a reflection back. And we made this attempt
probably 7 times.
About between 6 and 7 times. And the interesting thing is that we did have a reaction from it, and it looked almost like.
On that last time, there was some kind of response. John had noticed another light underneath this triangular object, and I'll let him explain.
Yeah, so the light itself was a rectangular beam of light in the infrared camera, in the night vision camera.
And we were both using infrared cameras. John's had a higher resolution and a little deeper into the infrared.
Right, 2 different cameras.
So I didn't see it initially. John saw it initially.
So what I saw was a rectangular beam of light that very quickly moved toward the shore. And the only thing I could surmise is that it was a part of something. It was part of an object. It was part of something else that was emitting this infrared light. Whenever I pulled the camera down, quickly pulling the camera down, I couldn't see anything in the visible spectrum. I couldn't see anything with my eyes. When I put the camera up, I could see this bright light, and it moved very quickly to the shore. Within a couple of seconds, it was on top.
Within a few feet of the shoreline, that's when I noticed. My camera captured it. It was a bluish, ovaloid, a spherical patch of light, and I couldn't tell if it was just under the surface of water or if it was being reflected from above down onto the water.
Yeah, that's something that we weren't sure.
We weren't sure. Yeah,
but the light itself there's no doubt about it. It was not visible. It wasn't visible. It was in the infrared spectrum.
It was infrared. Yeah.
And that light, as it moved to the shore, we started to have intermittent problems with the cameras. The cameras didn't function properly.
Yeah, we had electromagnetic interference with our cameras, and we determined it affected 3 of our cameras. Later on, affected another piece of equipment. But we'll continue with.
Yeah, so we had 4 cameras available to our group. Gerald and I had the 2 cameras out there. We were closest to the shore, right by the water's edge, and As this beam of light came up, my camera started to malfunction, and the recordings were intermittent. I had intermittent recordings,
And my camera developed a lot of noise.
and
Electrical noise.
Gerald's cameras were developed a lot of noise, and you could hear it. It wasn't just in the video. You'd see almost like a
acoustic noise. Huh?
yeah, it was acoustic noise, but you'd hear a white noise sound, or and you'd see the same in the video. It would just be all just a color confetti, graininess. Very little video was taken at that point because the cameras had malfunctioned. As we made our way back to the RV,
Well, we at that point we were almost panicked because whatever this light was, we weren't sure what it was, or whether it was some kind of weapon or
Yeah.
So John had yelled. Of course, there was when it was several feet from the shoreline that we need to run. Get out.
we need to
move
back.
So that's when I noticed that. Of course, we started to run to get away from it because it was on top of us at that point. And
yeah, so I experienced it first, and then Gerald did. It was a very momentary, short-term paralysis. From the waist down, I fell to the sand.
yeah, John collapsed on the sand.
I couldn't coordinate my legs under me to pick myself back up. This lasted roughly about 45 seconds.
Yeah.
And Gerald reached down to try to
So what's wrong? He
help
says,
me up.
and he was saying, I can't move. And we actually have a video where you can hear him saying that he was struggling to get up. He couldn't get his legs underneath him. I went to grab and pull him back up. We both started moving. He was starting to get strength back in his legs, and then my legs collapsed. I fell on the beach. I had no. It was to me. It was like a flaccid paralysis. There was no strength in my legs. I couldn't coordinate my legs.
Yeah, coordination.
So I had to drag myself with my hands through the sand to try to move.
And then also the camera equipment at the time was recording.
I turned the camera back as I fell, and my camera recorded a wave of IR energy that was engulfing us and engulfing the camera. And that's the last thing that we have on of course, on my camera.
And we have all this information. We have this documented. We have this data. We have, of course, this. It looked like a chevron pattern of light, of infrared light.
The other thing is, when we started to regain our strength, the cameras, of course, were working intermittently. We made our way. We were yelling back to the researchers that we brought along that was still setting up the equipment. One of them was actually a nurse. So we yelled for her assistance. We didn't know if we needed medical attention. We headed back to the mobile laboratory, which was, what would you say, 300?
It's about 106 meters exactly
from the shore.
From the water's edge.
So we made our way back to the RV. We started noticing that John's camera started to function again. And we were picking up an orb-like object in front of the optics, in front of the reticle. And you can explain this.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is, I used to be a camera technician. I used to repair these cameras for a long time. I was a service technician, and one of the interesting observations that I saw with this camera was that there's an automatic iris within the cameras. It's a shutter that actually shuts down if there's too much light getting into the camera's lens. So it protects the image sensor, the CCD, or if it's some other type of sensor, depending on what the NV cameras are using. What we saw was that when the iris shut down, you could see the lights had, it caused this reaction where the iris would shut down, but the light all of a sudden would be much brighter and it looked like it was beyond the iris motor. It was in the lens system itself,
In the optics. Yeah.
and this is something that I can't really explain. I've seen a lot of different failure modes with cameras, and this is one that I haven't seen before. It was intense. It was very intense. It caused a distortion of the image plate, the CCD, because of its intensity. But in my mind, is once that iris is shut down, how that light got beyond the iris is kind of a mystery. It's a mystery. So there was some telltale signs that there was something else going on here. It's they're not the typical failure modes. The camera batteries that they they were fully charged batteries.
Yeah,
By
we
the
had
time we were
batteries that
done,
were suddenly drained.
the batteries were completely drained.
Yep.
You know, so these are the oddities of this whole
And
experience.
it appeared to us that this object had followed whatever it was. It followed us back to the RV, the mobile lab, and we would intermittently. Then my camera started working. I would see something as well. To me, it looked like a blue orb of light. And John's camera, you would see like a similar kind of orb that we saw coming ashore, but it would move outside. It would try to move outside the field of view of the camera. And John would try to follow it, and I would try to follow where he was looking. So where is it? Because of course we couldn't see with our eyes, and then we had our teammates who were looking for it, but we told them it was invisible. So one of our teammates brought her IR camera to look at it, and her camera completely failed.
Yeah,
at this point,
it was non-operational, and even after the experience, the camera had to be replaced.
As far as we determined, whatever this was, it was seeming to be circling our camp there, our RV and our equipment. It was circling our equipment at a rapid pace. Then suddenly disappeared, and we couldn't acquire it anymore with the cameras.
Yeah, so the group of us went back down to the beach. You know, we all went.
Yeah,
down
we were
as
a
a
little
group.
at that point. We were a little shaken, so we got our second wind, and we walked back to the beach. This triangular object was still there, and we were recording it with the cameras we had. And of course, mine, John's was working again, and we had two other researchers
using their cameras. So, and then another interesting part of this experience is that we saw something bright on the beach where we were standing, roughly within about 15 feet.
Let me get a little before that. We noticed with that triangular object that we were filming, it was still fixed. There was another sphere of light that suddenly appeared to the right of it, off to on the right field of view, and it moved toward the left, across the field of view of our cameras. And it looked at one point it would wobble. It looked like it would come closer to us. At some points it looked like it would submerge under the water or suddenly disappear. Mm-hmm. And then as it moved to the left, then it would completely disappear. And then we would this was at the 45-minute mark or a little longer. This object suddenly, we moved the cameras back. This object, we noticed these two bright. I know, at least with my camera, I noticed these two bright objects on the beach. And it was small. They were just a few millimeters in size, but they were extremely bright. And there were two of them sitting on the beach where we had this first encounter or the beginning of this incident, right. where we had this paralysis. And we focused on that. We walked up to these objects, and they looked like there were two crustaceans. One was a shrimp and one was a krill, and they were charged with IR energy, which we couldn't account for. It wasn't bioluminescence. It was IR energy.
They were extremely bright in the infrared. I mean, if you focus the night vision cameras onto this area of the beach, it almost looked like somebody with a flashlight.
Oh yeah, shining back at you.
That's how bright these objects were. Yeah. They were charged with a large amount of infrared energy. How that's possible, I don't know. I've never seen that before.
The interesting thing is, as we're looking at this, we look back. I tried to look back up at the triangular object, and it disappeared. It was gone. But we did notice when we panned the camera over, it dissipated. The objects appeared to be going up, and then there was in the middle of them, there was a bright red flash that flashed twice, and it disappeared. And of course, all these objects were completely gone. Mm-hmm. But it looked like we were distracted or deliberately distracted with these two crustaceans that were charged with IR energy. So it was a second bioeffect. There was a first bioeffect with our legs, and then of course there was a second bioeffect with these two crustaceans.
Has either of you had any longer term effects from the temporary paralysis?
It seemed to be temporary. From what we can determine, it lasted a couple of days. We also had tenderness on our lymph glands, me and my neck, and John in some other areas. There was fatigue. Other than that, the effects dissipated within a day or two, I think.
Yeah.
Did you study the crustaceans for much longer? Was that something? Yeah, we brought them back. We took a sample container, and we brought them back to the RV. We have a little biolab in there. I had examined them under a microscope, and both of them had large avulsions, large openings in their thorax that looked like something that there was either a thermal heating of the insides of them, where they might have burst out. The insides might have burst out from thermal changes, thermal heating. They also looked desiccated. They're dried out. And like I said, both of them they both had the same large opening in their thorax.
Yeah, they weren't even alive. They
were dead. They were dead.
Yeah.
I mean, they couldn't have been emitting any kind of energy, and it certainly wasn't bioluminescence. This was like I said, it was IR.
Strictly
and
IR.
this IR energy lasted maybe an hour, and then it started to dissipate. And it was then, of course, there was no luminosity from these two crustaceans.
During the investigations over that 10-month period, am I correct?
Say it again.
That during the investigation, it was over a 10-month period.
Yes.
Did any other scientists or engineers or colleagues get involved at any point or come in to see the data?
Yes, we had shown several scientists that data. In fact, we went over it with a couple of scientists from the Galileo Project. We went over it with. We actually talked about it with Gary Nolan. He had come out with us one time, and we actually showed him the videos, which he thought were very intriguing, and he thought they were extraordinary, actually. And nobody really had a good answer for it. You could try to pick it apart. I mean, but I think it's kind of difficult to pick apart.
Yeah, the experience is something that, to this day, and we, it's not something we can wrap our heads around either. It's, it was unusual. We've re-examined the video data over and over again.
Even the piece of equipment, we didn't even trust the equipment. I mean, we didn't think it was an artifact. We had several pieces of equipment that recorded this. We ended up doing a complete failure analysis on that equipment. John had taken it apart. We completely taken it apart. And you can comment on that.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the infrared illuminators, and I had a pair of binoculars, the night vision with binoculars, and it has an infrared illuminator on it.
Yeah. So we tried to determine if it was a rangefinder issue.
Right. And whether or not why the rangefinder came on, number one, and the parameters necessary to set that up were basically fused. In other words, those macros, I couldn't change them after that was set. I actually had to reset the camera itself. I had to do a complete reset in order to reestablish that data, or that baseline data again. So, this is unusual to me. It's normally you find stuff like that, after an electrical storm where you have a sudden transient of energy. And I've done a lot of repairs where we'd go to a particular customer or residence and find out there was some odd failure modes to their electronics, and it would happen right after an electrical
storm. Usually a lightning strike.
So these high energy changes can wipe out the memories, can corrupt the data, and that sort of thing. And that's exactly what happened to this camera. It almost looked like there was, some higher level of energy, electrical energy.
Yeah, some kind of electromagnetic
interference of some sort.
Was there a natural ending to the investigation for that, or was it something you'd pre-planned that this was the point, we have enough?
No, we kept going
to see if we can get more, and we did. Of course, we did see other objects with spheres of light that would, at one point, hovering over the beach itself and actually casting a light reflection on the grass. We recorded that. We also recorded a sphere of light over the water. We noticed this was actually visible, and we also picked it up on the IR cameras, and it cast a reflection on the ocean surface. It was very low to the ocean, and then there were 4 or 5 other objects that appeared with it, other spheres of light that were, of course, directly in front of us. And this is when we started to record this wedge pattern of radar targets that were intermittent. So it was interesting. It was an interesting correlation,
right? And something I'll just add to that is that when we were looking at these objects, whether they were both visible and near infrared and IR, they were not in the long wave, the thermal. There's a short wave infrared and there's the long wave. The long wave is actually producing all the heat.
That's what you see with FLIR systems.
So with the FLIR systems, this is something that was absent. We weren't able to see anything in the FLIR.
Yeah, because we tried to look for a silhouette of a structure that was producing this light, and there was nothing there. Nothing showed up on the FLIR, which is I don't know. It's not typical. It's not something that
that would be very difficult to do.
Yeah, you would have to try to match the background temperature in order to not see that.
I mean, even a fraction of a degree difference, you would see a differential between the object and the background, the background radiation, the background heating. The fact that you saw nothing means that this object had to have been at the same exact temperature as the background.
And in our mind, it could be another form of signature management.
Right.
What's the plan then? You've got an incredible amount of data. I couldn't even guess how much you've got between recordings, sensors, and everything else.
Well, the interesting thing is we had 3 scientists that had come out with us. I don't want to give their names because I don't know if they want to be identified looking at it right now.
That's fair.
Because of academic politics or whatever.
Yeah.
So, 3 scientists come out for 2 full nights with us. They were very impressed with what we had and our equipment system setup. They had brought some of their equipment out also to try to record something. We're now in collaboration with that scientific team. We also have a federal agency that reached out to us. I don't know if I don't want to give the name right now because
we can.
There was a branch of the FBI that the FBI reached out to us, and they were interested in what we had out there, and of course now we're collaborating with them as well. And
we're sharing data that we have, and some data was given to us originally because of some pilot sightings.
Yeah, there was some shared pilot sightings too, and we found that the pilots were seeing objects similar to what we were seeing in the same area we were seeing them,
right,
and in that same time frame.
Yeah, so that kind of collaborated.
So that was a nice
what we've been seeing.
Yeah, that was a nice
and
correlation.
Several pilots have reported this.
Yeah.
I'm going to speculate for a moment and get your opinions on this. Do you feel we are seeing objects like that have maybe always been there and are there far more frequently than we can imagine, but our technology is just now catching up to a place where folks like yourselves don't need multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar industries with nuclear-powered Navy fleets out there attracting these things, that you're now starting to pick these up? Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think the technology has caught up to that point where, if you're a little ingenuity and you can come up with a piece of equipment that would have some of the same detection capabilities as some of the stuff the military has.
Right.
And the fact that the Ryan Graves and other pilots, when they had changed their radar system, that they started to know these objects is an interesting example of this.
Yeah,
that's the change in technology.
Well, the radars themselves weren't really designed to pick up smaller objects or biomasses. They're designed for larger objects, and sometimes they just take tuning, like with the marine-based radar. There's weather radar. There's of course everybody's using the Doppler radar systems, but the wavelength of the radar itself can be fine-tuned to pick up smaller objects and be able to reflect that in the imagery, especially if you're looking at weather patterns, if you're looking at moisture areas in the cloud layers. The radar itself can be tuned to see that. So it's increasing the gain, increasing the clutter response, whether it's rain or sea, and it can be tuned in such a way that if you have a moisture area, you could certainly see that. Or if you're looking at biomass, birds, you'll be able to see that as well. They'll be especially if they're in clusters, and that all depends on the sensitivity of the radar itself. They're what they call clutter settings.
Yeah, and I forget the model of the radar system that the FA-18 Hornets, Super Hornets were using. I think it was an AG-179 or something like that.
Yeah, I believe so.
They upgraded to. Yeah.
Well, before we get to some listener questions to finish off, I wonder, do you have advice for others who maybe, like yourselves, find they have the time, the will, the money, the capability to do similar and try and get involved, technologically with this sort of investigation? What have you learned and what would your advice be?
It's a big undertaking. I will say that it's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, it takes a lot of patience to look at the sky. I mean, you can start with using near IR cameras,
night vision stuff,
night vision cameras. The cell phones themselves have apps.
Cell phones have a lot of apps. The cell phones also have a lot of interesting sensors too. They have magnetometers in them. They have G-force sensors. They have these are accelerometers. There's a lot of sophisticated electronics in the cell phones, proximity sensors and stuff that can be utilized for some of this investigation.
Yeah, they could take advantage of that.
They certainly take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And this is like dual use technology. It's in there. I was surprised to see how amazingly accurate some of these sensors are. When I worked for Underwriters Laboratories, we used to test some of these devices, and you could see that they would track some of our more expensive sensors for testing these types of electronic inputs. So it's something that can certainly be utilized. Especially the cameras. There's this very specialized apps that can even make a cell phone a Geiger counter. So this is something that can certainly be done. You have to spend a lot of time out there and do a lot of observations, and there are times when you'll see nothing. So you got to be patient. That's the biggest thing is being patient and really observing even after the fact. Once you get the data, you have to have a second set of eyes or a third set of eyes on what you recorded, because the first few go-arounds, we found out we missed a lot of stuff that was in the background that we would see later on, like falling objects. We see falling objects in the video as well.
Yeah, that was something else that we had seen. We noticed in some of the videos that we didn't see at the time we were out there, but there were these same kind of spherical objects that would seem to fall vertically straight down through the cloud layers.
Yeah,
and they just suddenly disappear.
Right, and the biggest thing with research like this too is if you're independently wealthy, that's great. In my case, I used a good portion of my retirement to get, to
get started.
Yeah, to obtain.
And then luckily we had a funder that came forward and helped us out, keep us going for a year.
Yeah, because the thing is, we didn't want to use cheap equipment. We didn't want to use anything that was marginally accepted. So even if, even by calibration purposes, we wanted equipment that could be calibrated, that did have a certain accuracy level, a tolerance level, and that costs money. All of that costs money. I mean, thermal cameras that have the proper zoom capabilities, they're expensive. And if you really want to dive into it and look at the stuff, and you definitely have to have those particular features on this equipment
and get comfortable with what normal air traffic looks like.
Right, exactly.
And where your airports are, where your flight corridors are,
because that can fool you. I mean, it fooled us a few times, and it's
even the patterns of birds, the flights of migrating birds or bats.
Right. My biomass, and but this is something that somebody's just trying to get into. For groups that are serious about it, like what we are, we're on the front lines as researchers, is having investment opportunities. Having investors that are willing to reach out and help support this cause. And the other thing is I just got to mention the overall support. There's not a lot of overall support. Unfortunately, academia doesn't look at it the same way, unless they're doing the research. We're not PhDs, but we are seasoned engineers. And we're instrumentation experts.
I mean, that can improve. We definitely need a full collaboration with everybody. It's going to require multidisciplines to understand this to its entirety. So, I mean, everybody's got to collaborate.
Yeah, it's got to be better communication and so forth, and ability to work with other groups. If we're going to gather data, especially new data, You know,
that's what's great with us with these three scientists from at least two or three universities had reached out, and of course they came out. They were out with us for two full nights.
Right. So that kind of support is desperately needed. It's important.
That's important.
You know, it's you have the mainstream science view. You have, the actual science that's got to look at it, but you also need the engineers and the technicians, and you need the instrumentation specialists that know the equipment, that understand the equipment. Because if you don't have that a good foundation as far as how that equipment is operating and what kind of artifacts you can get if it's improperly utilized, that can throw off your data. Mm-hmm. Data, it could scrub your data. So that's something that that's very important. It's very, very important.
Well, let's finish with a few listener questions just before I melt, guys. And also, I'm sure you guys are pretty warm where you are. Parachute Pants asks, do you often see U.S. military presences follow or accompany any UAP sightings, like fighter jets or helos?
The only thing we noticed an aircraft out there, an unmarked aircraft, but we weren't really sure. It could have been a military aircraft, but we didn't see a lot of them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's not.
There was one time we saw there was some helicopters out there, but it was due to a boat being overturned. But sure. I don't think we didn't see much of a military presence out there, other than normal shipping traffic.
Yeah, and to be fair, given what you're describing, it sounds like a lot of objects that aren't visible to the naked eye.
Yeah.
And a lot of cases where we see military have followed or accompanying, escorting, chasing, tend to be more solid physical objects. So that for me would make sense, but it's a good question.
Oh, there's actually there was a couple of nights where we had incidents. There were vehicles out there that were at one point they were a distance from us, but they were in a small arc in a circle behind our RV, and they had their high beams on so they could see us and we couldn't see them. So that's interesting.
Yeah, unmarked.
We weren't sure if that was if that could be some kind of military or some kind of governmental agency. They were out there for a few hours, I think, observing what we were doing, and then they left
several times too.
Yeah, it was several times. It was they would be out there maybe a couple of hours and then leave. But that was interesting. So maybe that could have been.
Question from Algo asks, unlike 50 years ago, technology for observation and recording is now available to everyone. Our streets are full of it. Our skies probably are too, between private planes, drones, satellites, and ground systems. Can you make an overall assessment of the data that must exist and what UAP anomalies should be recorded in that data?
Yeah, so that kind of data. I mean, there's a lot of apps out there. I know there's quite a few organizations now that are, you can report directly what you're taking with the cell phone data. The only thing I would say with cell phones, you got to be careful. The compression rates on these cell phones are very high. If there's anything moving, the imagery is very distorted. It comes up very distorted. So it's hard to get any kind of detail. And it's happened to us too. We've actually had some police officers and so forth, some law enforcement people give us some videos that they took from their cell phone. And the issue with that is that the cell phone videos are highly compressed. If they're stationary, objects are stationary, you'll get pretty decent detail, but if they're moving, they're undergoing compression ratios and the imagery is very, very distorted. So it's hard to get that. Some of the newer cameras have a raw mode where you definitely want to, there's applications that allow you to use raw data and not compress it down. The only thing is those file sizes are very large. They're very, very large, but that would definitely help out in identifying this stuff, especially if it's being reported. But the video files have to be large in order to contain as much detail as you need. The compression is not good. It's not good with these cameras.
I just want to mention one thing. I don't know if you see behind us. That's one of our mini integrated systems.
Yeah,
camera systems. It's actually two of them. There's one over here too.
Oh, never saw that one. You've been hiding that one well.
Yeah, that's behind its back.
That's two systems where we've been running and testing out. It's a third generation system.
Yeah, hyperspectral cameras.
Hyperspectral system.
There's small radar systems in there. There's they call millimeter wave radar.
It's all in one.
And this will record everything from UV to IR, to the deep IR, into the thermal. So they have thermal cameras in it. They have used UV detectors that are extremely sensitive. You could light a match from a half a mile away, and this will pick it up.
And the reason we're using a UV detector is we're looking for if it's generating an ionization field or a plasma. We could pick it up with the UV sensor.
Yeah. So this is very, of course, this is the third generation, like Gerald said, and it's very specialized for that purpose.
Difference between you and me, you've got thousands of dollars of equipment behind you. I've got a tumble dryer behind this curtain. So
that could be a problem.
Yeah, and a final question from Bison asks, and I don't know if he means John or Gerry here, but he says, Tedesco, for some reason, thinks Tim Gallaudet, former Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who's been doing a lot of has been doing a lot of talking recently on the UFO UAP topic. He has said, you've said he's an honest guy and wonders if you know anything about new US Navy technology. And I wonder, I know you've said you've spoken to researchers and you've got a colleague who, private detective, what percentage of this could still be some sort of new technology that you wouldn't be able to find out about?
It could.
That's something I don't think we can answer because it's that may be so classified that they're just never going to talk about it.
And it could very well be. It could be new technology. It could be.
But the interesting thing is, if it was, then why is the FBI asking us to help them figure it out?
yeah, but there is divisions of the Department of Defense and so forth. That
if this is a branch of it or some kind of compartmentalized division, but that's something that would be hard to answer. I think.
Yeah. I mean, if it is some high tech that's being used by the military,
Although it's bizarre, if it is, why you just have these objects randomly meandering off the shoreline all hours of the night? For what reason? For what purpose? It doesn't really make sense. And then like some of these we see hovering over the water, and we saw one spinning over the water, rotating and changing its intensity. And what's it doing over the water?
As the logical next step then, and to finish off, final question, what is the next step for you guys? But also, what are the chances of getting something that you can put in the water to go out and try and get to those locations?
That's something we had talked about with Dr. Tim Gallaudet, that admiral. Because he's interested to get it funded to do some marine research. We told him if he wanted to join us out there, he's welcome.
US, looking at USOs.
But that's something we brought up, is the fact that possibly bringing boats out there or some kind of ROV
or drones.
Or some.
I mean,
probably a sea drone, like a ROV.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, again, it all has to do with, funding and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's require funding.
The equipment, that we have, we're like I said, we're using a third generation type camera systems, and we're into what we call a phase 2, where we're trying to get, measurement data. We want to know what the spectral response is on these things. We want to know if it, if it has certain kind of mass, that we want to be able to reflect LiDAR off of it. I mean, these are all, things that make it much more substantial. And we have, to some extent, recorded small objects that we were able to get reflections back from LiDAR and that sort of thing. So it
would suggest that they have mass.
They have mass, and it's not a star. It's not, within a local range. I'm talking about.
The interesting thing is some of those ones that we were able to reflect the LiDAR off of, when their luminosity would decrease, they would appear. They would look like. To us, they would look like polyhedral structures. They would be almost like a polygon, or a three-dimensional polygon rotating,
or a cube of some sort.
Some kind of a truncated cube that with several flat sides that maybe reflect. It almost look like a Christmas tree when it rotates.
Yeah. They always seem to have some kind of rotation. That's the interesting thing. There's a pattern of glinting that you'd see, and the glinting would have the multicolored. It almost look like a it would be strobing, but it would be colors like typically we'd see as blue, red, orange, green, and and it would look like a kaleidoscope if you looked at it.
And that's in fact one police officer had mentioned that to us when they showed us the video. that he saw something in the sky looked like a Christmas ornament spinning, shining with sparkling different colors of light, rainbow of light colors.
Right. And what we've been able to determine from our observations is that these objects are anywhere between, the ones at least we measured, between 2 and 4 meters in diameter.
Yeah, typically.
Yeah, they're relatively small. And they do seem to have some kind of a polyhedral shape to them.
And that kind of fits what the pilots like Ryan Grace, like on the Eastern Seaboard, was saying. Is they talked about these cube-like objects and with these clear spheres around them.
Yeah.
If you're a polyhedral object, and the more sides you put on it, of course, it starts to become circular. So, and it could be these same objects.
Right. And they, and with rotation, they can actually change their luminous level, where they look like just the orbs of light.
It could look like a pack, like a spherical packet around it, or an enclosure.
Yeah, I mean, but the rotational speed is variable. But they always seem to be rotating in some way, at least by our observations.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, guys, it's been well worth the wait on my part to speak to you. I know this has been a month or two in the making now. Listen, people can go out and get more detail on this. They can pick up a copy of Nightcrawler, Eye on the Sky.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, this is the book.
Already prepared.
This is the hardcover edition.
Is the best place to pick that up on Amazon? Yeah.
Yeah, you can pick it up on Amazon. It's called Nightcrawler, Eye in the Sky.
Yeah,
I'll make sure the link for that, folks, is in the description, so you can get it on hardback, paperback, or Kindle as well. So I'd recommend, if you want to know the detail behind that investigation, certainly pick that up. And I look forward to getting you gents back on in future when you've got some more data to share. That would be wonderful.
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good.
Yes.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us on.
That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify. Just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass.